At the west end of Omaha Beach, a squat German bunker faces down the long strip of sand. Today, it is a monument to the National Guard. On June 6, 1944, that bunker spewed fire and death, ending the life of many a young man of infinite promise who had arrived on the beach only moments before, including Taylor Fellers and Company A from Bedford. I have stood on that spot many times, gazing out at the water, thinking of the men who landed that day, and wondering how in God's name did they do this? How did so many not simply survive the ordeal, but win the day and launch the liberation of Europe? What an extraordinary testament to the courage and perseverance of those men. Of course, many didn't survive. On the other end of that beach, up on the bluff, is the Normandy American Cemetery. And walk among the 9,388 gleaming white crosses that Tom mentioned, and you cannot help but feel the heavy price of that victory. As General Dwight D. Eisenhower said on the day the Germans surrendered, "We owe the soldiers who won that victory a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid." So we have an obligation to remember what they accomplished and what it cost, an obligation that extends to the 17 million American men and women who served in that war and all who have served and continue to serve our country. But it's not just an obligation to them. It's an obligation to ourselves, to our children, to our future as a nation. We owe it to ourselves to remember. President Abraham Lincoln had a deep understanding of this in his first inaugural. Before one drop of blood had been shed in the Civil War, he spoke about, and these are his words, the mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and heartstone across this broad land. So many answered the call in World War II. A veteran who I knew, John Jarvie, said, "It was a big war and everybody went." And we're so glad that they did. Remembering their service and sacrifice, as Lincoln knew, is a powerful way to bind ourselves together as a nation when there are forces threatening to tear us apart. Remembering can unite us. And if we fail to remember, how can we know what we as Americans are capable of when times are at their worst? How can we know what heroism even means? As author Michael Crichton once wrote, "If you don't know history, you don't know anything. You're like a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree." Well, we should not turn away from the parts of our history that are troubling or difficult. We must not neglect the parts that lift us up. Remembering can inspire us. Among the multitudes gathered for the invasion 77 years ago were the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the remarkable unit that became known as the Ghost Army. This traveling roadshow of deception went into action shortly after D-Day, using inflatable tanks, sound effects, radio trickery, and impersonation to deceive Hitler's legions on the battlefields of Europe. By fooling the enemy, they sought to lessen the number of men destined to die, young, trembling, in a muddy field, so very far from home. Over the last 16 years, I have been engaged in my own act of remembering, researching, and telling the story of this unit, seeking official recognition for their secret missions that help save lives and bring about Allied victory. And I'm pleased to say that legislation is now pending in Congress to award them a Congressional Gold Medal. And I thank the D-Day Memorial Foundation for supporting that effort. There are only 11 of those soldiers left out of 1,100 who went to war. Soon the Ghost Army will be an army of ghosts. I feel a fierce personal obligation to each of those soldiers to make sure what they did is not forgotten. I will not let them down, and I want to make sure that future generations have the benefit of knowing that story. And the good news is that that's already happening. In Iowa, Nashua, Iowa, there is an 8th grader who has interviewed several Ghost Army veterans for his National History Day project, which has gone on to the National History Day finals this year. And it has lit a fire in him about World War II history. And he is not alone. I have talked to middle schoolers and high schoolers, boys and girls all across the country who've embraced the Ghost Army story and who've become ambassadors for history. They are carrying on this effort to remember, and nothing gives me more hope for the future than that. Our job is to preserve the history, preserve the stories, so that they live on after we have passed the scene, and so that they can carry the torch. Remembering is our duty. And so, thank you on this 77th anniversary of D-Day for engaging in an act of remembering, for coming here on the 20th anniversary of this amazing spot that has been carrying out the duty of remembering so well. And it is our privilege on this day to be joined by a distinguished body of men who belonged to the Allied Expeditionary Force that invaded occupied France 77 years ago. And I want to address my words here to them, and they're in different places, but I see Ash back here. I see Louis out there. You are seated here today at this magnificent memorial to the valor, fidelity, and sacrifice that you displayed with such abundance while doing what you believe to be nothing more or less than your duty. Most of your brothers in arms are not here today, but we remember their stories and yours. The 6th of June, 1944 was a day during which uncommon acts of valor and sacrifice were commonplace. Your achievements have not been forgotten. In a moment, the 29th Division Band will play The Longest Day. When you hear its opening notes, I say to the D-Day veterans, please make your way to the front of the sculpture, either on your own or with an escort, and face the crowd so that we may recognize you and your great service to the cause of freedom. And we also invite any veteran of World War II to join them. If it were not for the efforts of all who served in the Allied effort, regardless of race, religion, and nationality, we would not enjoy the many freedoms we have today. In fighting fascism and defending democracy, those who served safeguarded the very foundations of their nation and their country's collective past and future. If you are a veteran of World War II, please come forward at this time so we may recognize you.